In this video, we will hook up a car sub amp to a home stereo. You're going to need your car amp, a stereo system that has some kind of audio out. In this case, it's a tape out, your normal left and right speakers, the sub cabinet itself, and lastly, an inverter to turn AC into 12-volt DC. So let's get started. A car sub amp will take 12 volts DC because the car battery is 12 volts DC. However, the power in your house is AC, so you're going to need an inverter. In a later video, I will show you how to use an old power supply from a PC, and you can tap into the 12-volt lines. But in this one, I'm just using my regular bench power. So this unit here will take the AC from the outlet and turn it into 12 volts DC right here. Black ground is negative and hot red is the plus side. And you have to have enough amps to handle whatever the amp is. So look up the power requirements of the amp to make sure that your DC is going to have enough oomph. In this case, this one's 60 amps, so it's fine. But you can't use one of those little cheapo inverters that's only got a couple amps of power, because that won't. It might be 12 volts DC, but it doesn't have enough amps to power one of these big subs. This one here is 1600 watts. Okay, so let's take the power. The red positive goes over to the amp, red positive. Obviously, the black negative goes over to the input on the amp, black negative. And then the last wire to mention is that one in the middle, the thinner wire. If you can see that right in the middle, called remote. If you had this hooked up in your car, you would have to send a signal over to the amp to let it know that you've turned on the ignition, you've turned on your car, so it's time to go ahead and power on. That's what that remote line is. You'll have to look up the specs on your amp to see how many volts will be going into that remote line. It's probably 12 volts because, again, the car battery is 12 volts, and on this Boss amp it is in fact 12 volts. So I go ahead and tap another line right there. The thinner wire is going to the same place as the red positive 12 volt DC, and that little thin line goes over to the one that's marked as remote. Basically, that's telling the amp to turn on. It's pretending like you're turning on the ignition of your car. It's getting a 12 volt signal, and it goes ahead and turns on the amp. Okay, obviously you will take the red and black lines that are supposed to go over to the speaker cabinet, take them out of the amp, and hook up your sub cabinet. So that's all hooked up. Lastly, make sure your amp, your stereo, is all set. So the stereo has the normal left and right speakers. That'll handle your mids and your highs, but we want to it'll handle a little bit of bass too, but we want to get that sub signal. So take the output, an audio output from this stereo, and send it over to the input on your amp. In this case, it's a left and right RCA plugs. There's different outputs from different stereos. Obviously, you have to have some type of output for this to work. If you don't have, in this case, it's a tape out, has RCA jacks left and right. If the only output you have is the headphone jack, that's not going to work, because normally with most stereos, as soon as you plug in the headphones, the normal speakers are going to go out. Your left and right speakers are going to turn off, so you don't want to take the headphone output. So you need some type of output other than the headphone to send over to your amp. In this case, there's something called tape out, left and right signal, line level, comes over here, goes into the amp. And the very last connection on the amp to mention is this wire right here, which goes over to the volume gain control for the sub itself. In your car, you'd have this under your car seat so you can control the amount of sub. So hook that up. That way you can, you don't want to overpower it. It's up to you how much sub you want. You want to have separate control of the signal going to the sub frequencies versus the normal volume that's going to control your left and right speakers. So it's all hooked up, and let's go ahead and turn it on. So I turned down the volume, so there's no more signal going to the left and right speakers that have the mids and the highs. We only get the sub. We can control the volume of the sub with that control right there. And when we turn on the normal mids and highs again, we can get a good mix. I like that.